As Purim is a time for merrymaking, enjoying, but also being silly, this also finds itself actually expressed in humorous textual parodies, something we're going to be discussing here on the 126th episode of The Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life. I'm your host, Rabbi Drew Kaplan, and I'm very excited to welcome first-time guest of the show. First-time guest of the show, Professor Richard Sarason. Welcome, Professor Sarason.
Thanks. My pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So for those less familiar with Professor Sarason, he is the director of the Pines School of Graduate Studies, professor of Rabbinic Literature and Thought, and the Deutsch Family Professor of Rabbinics and Liturgy at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, right here in the Queen City of the West, Cincinnati, Ohio, where he has been a faculty member since 1979. Prior to that time, he was assistant professor of religious studies at Brown University, where he received his Ph.D. in 1977. He was ordained at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, Cincinnati in 1974. He received his A.B. in economics from Brandeis University in 1969 and was a visiting graduate student at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem from 1970 to 1972 while attending HUC-JIR. He has published books on Demai, prayer, and dozens of articles. So welcome, Professor Sarason. It's a lot.
Good to be here. That's a big mouthful.
It is, and we didn't touch upon it at all in the bio, but you have done some teaching on the topic we're going to get to, though. Right?
I've done some teaching on the topic we're talking about.
Okay.
Yes, right.
So we have Purim coming up, and it is a raucous time full of laughter, silliness, and yes, drinking. There is an 18th century Purim parody in the guise of a Talmudic tractate, which is focused on, you guessed it, drinking on Purim. And for those listeners who remember a year ago, we did an episode on 14th century Purim parodies out there. And so this, and Professor Sarason, does this in any way draw upon those centuries? No, not at all. Okay.
Not at all. It is completely autonomous.
Completely. Okay. But it, at least, to the very least, it sort of follows in the footsteps, so to speak. Of that tradition. Okay.
Correct. I mean, the one from the 14th century was Italian. This one is Polish. So it's not even clear whether they knew the 14th century one.
At least there's a precursor.
But there's a precursor.
We can look back at all these different parodies and say that was
exactly right. And there may have even been a second precursor, according to Israel Davidson, who is our Maven on the whole issue of Purim parodies.
Oh, wonderful. All right. So as a background, so how much have you taught about this parody?
Well, I supervised a rabbinic thesis that dealt with both of those Purim parodies. This was about this was easily 35 years ago.
Wow.
And Adam Rosenthal, who did the piece last year on the 14th century Purim parody, is one of my graduate students.
Well, for those who may have never heard of it, this is called Massekhet Purim. Now, it's funny, this whole title page looks like any other Talmudic title page, except for the actual words on the page. So it talks about Massekhet Purim, okay? Min ha-Talmud Shikurim, from the Talmud of the drunks. Blah blah blah, but it's funny. Haggadah Leleil Shikurim instead of I mean, clearly this is playing off of, and we're going to get into it, playing off of some of the Passover stuff, some of the language of Passover. Instead of Leil Shimurim, it's Leil Shikurim. Apparently there's
at the bottom we've got Slichot for Purim. Right? Right. If you haven't drunk enough, you have to recite Slichot, right?
How would you describe the stylistics of this Masechet Purim?
Okay, the best parodies are the ones that honor what they're parodying. Which is to say, the people who write the parody, and we don't know, by the way, who the author of this one is. We know, I mean, the author of the 14th century parody is Italian, Rabbi Colonelus Ben Colonelus, but this is anonymous. And we think that it's, that the final version, which is what we have here, is the work of a bunch of yeshiva bochers in Poland. Because that's the culture here. And they know the original so well that they can parody it so well. So what you have here, you have Mishnayot that clearly refer, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, to some of the Mishnayot in Pesachim and in Brachot and in Megillah and even in the Babas. And then you've got Gemara, which a lot of the conventions of the Talmud and of its rhetoric and of its style are parodied here. And of course, the other thing about parody is that what makes it funny is if you do it straight. That is to say, you have to be very serious about what you're doing as you present it in order for it to be funny. And then, as you can see around the page, it looks like a page of Shas, right? So you've got on the inner margins, you've got Tosfot, and on the outer margins, you've got Perush Rashi, and down at the bottom of the page, some of the pages, I guess all the pages, it's just sometimes it's shorter, you've got Maharsha. So that is to say, you've got the glosses of Samuel Adel's Kiviachol, right? As it were. The style, and again, these Bachurim know their stuff so well that they can just spin it out. So, I mean, and it's wonderful that way. It's a good Talmudic exercise.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, obviously the standard structure of Mishnah and Gemara for those who may have some Talmudic experience, and also the mixture of Braitot and Amoraic statements and various Stamatic and stuff in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And of course, all of the named Rabbonim are pseudonyms, shall we say, for the occasion of Purim. So
Purim, also drinking or just drinking.
Also, they all relate to drinking.
Yeah.
So, for example, you have names like Rav Kada, that is Kad,
like a jug,
right?
Yeah.
Rav Chamra, okay, that
like wine,
inebriating beverage, right? Rav Yena, which is wine. Rav Shachran, shikur. Rav Dana, which is also, this is not Dan, but this is Dana, which in Aramaic is a jug. So again, it's a wine receptacle.
Yeah.
You've got Rav Shtia, drink.
Or Stein or Stian.
And Rav Stein, right? So
right.
You said a giveaway that this was done in Eretz Ashkenaz, right? And of course, Stein in German in Ashkenaz is a beer mug.
Yeah.
So it all fits.
In particular, that really stands out to you.
Let me give you all a couple of salient examples. All right. Let's begin at the very beginning, right? A very good place to start on Purim. The first Mishnah is a ripoff of the first Mishnah of Tractate Pesachim, which, when you stop and think about it, makes very good sense. So here's the original. Okay, the first chapter of Pesachim, as some of you out there know, deals with the issue of biur chametz. That is to say, before Pesach, what you need to do is clear out all of the chametz. All right, all the leaven. So Mishnah Pesachim begins as follows: Or l'arba asar bodkim et hachametz l'or haner. Kol makom she'ein machnisim bo chametz ein sarich b'dika. That is to say, on the evening of the 14th of the month, and of course, in this case, it's obviously the 14th of Nisan, we search for leaven by candlelight. Any place where you haven't brought in any leaven, you don't need to search there. Okay, so we are dealing with a month before that. So we are dealing with the 14th of Adar. Okay. And consequently, we begin thus wise. Or la'arba'asar yom בודקים את המים מן הבתים ומן החצרות. כל מקום שאין מכניסים בו מים, אין צריך בדיקה. All right. So on Pesach, what we need to get rid of is leaven. On Purim, what we need to get rid of is water. Okay? Because everything has to be wine. And frankly, in terms of the thematics of this tractate, in terms of what goes all the way through it, it's, as it were, wine versus water. Okay.
And I would actually underscore it. There's almost like this fanatical need to rid oneself of any water.
Exactly. Parenthetically, Israel Davidson maintains that there are basically four versions of this. This is the last one, the latest one, and it's fairly clear that the immediately preceding three are related to this one in terms of there's a lot of the same material, and it sort of moves in the same direction. He maintains that there's an even earlier version that is 17th century that is still a source for this, and I'm not convinced looking at it, because it's not Talmudic in style. Basically, it's kind of Agadata or Midrash. But the theme of that early version is water versus wine. So that, or wine versus water, if you will. So that does, go on throughout. An interesting thing, as I say, about the 17th century version, which is basically all Agadata. So Noah is praised as, of course, the fellow who planted the first vineyards and got drunk. And he's also the one who was saved in the flood. Everybody else drowned in water, right? So Noah is praiseworthy. And ironically,
that appears as a little bit in a way.
Exactly. Yeah. Noah will appear in all these things in one way, shape, or form, but he's a little bit more expanded on in this Agadic version. And who among the ancestors is criticized? Well, Isaac is criticized. Why? Because Isaac dug wells for water, right? So wow. Isaac, he had the wrong idea, right? The wrong liquid. Okay. So water is what we clear out on before Purim. So and any place where we hadn't brought in water, we don't need to check. Okay. I'll give you a little flavor of what the Gemara is on this. And it's typical in terms of the way a Talmudic sugya develops. Very commonly, Talmudic sugyot begin in one of two ways, either by citing a baraita that needs to be juxtaposed with the Mishnah, that is to say, a non-Mishnaic contemporary tradition, or asking the question, Manahane Mile, that is to say, where does this come from? Where in Scripture? Asking for a scriptural source for the ruling. And that's how we begin this Gemara. Manahane Mile, from where in Scripture do we know this? Well, here's the answer. Amar Kra. Scripture says, Uve'arta hara mikirbecha. That's Deuteronomy 13:6. And you shall, and this is of course biur, right? And you shall, rid yourself of the evil that is in your midst. And what is your evil? Ein ra elamayim. It has to be water, right? Shenemar, as we know from Scripture, hamayim ra'im, right? The waters were bad. Which is 2 Kings, right? And then we begin to have Memrot, okay? Amar Rav Chamra. We talked about that name before. Mei Perot asur lishtot befurim, okay? You're not allowed to drink fruit juice on Purim. It has to be, the strong stuff. That's the point, okay? And then, of course, they get into a discussion of, matama, why not? Amarkra, also because Scripture says, la sototam yemei mishteh v'simcha. which of course is from the Megillah, Esther. We're commanded to make these days of joy and rejoicing. Ve'ein simcha ela b'yayin, okay? And simcha refers to wine, obviously. Shene'emar, b'yayin yisamach levav enosh, right? From Proverbs, okay?
And some of this language is found also actually in the real Tractate Pesachim, right? So
that's the point.
Yeah.
That's the point. In other words, what we have here, certainly in terms of style, in terms of rhetoric, in terms of, if you will, standard manipulations, questions and answers, is completely Talmudic. It is only the content that is Purim Torah. But the style and the rhetoric is legit. That's the point. And that's why this is so funny, right? I mean, if you have to explain it, but that's what's going on here, and that's why it's such a marvelous parody.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. As we're talking about 18th century, guess what? The 18th century and 19th century rabbis had to deal with Purim drinking. How do they deal with that? Well, here's a sneak peek into next week's episode.
If it exists, why does it exist? And from the reason for it, you can start discussing, well, does that apply just to wine? Does it include other beverages as well? But what really is novel in the 18th century is finally 1,500 years after the Gemara said it, someone stops and asks, why? Everything we've discussed up till this point has either been, do we rule like that opinion in the Gemara? And assuming we do, how much is Adolayada? What exactly is the sheer of how much you're supposed to drink if you're supposed to drink?
I hope you enjoyed that sneak peek into next week's episode. Now back into this episode with Professor Sarason.
The next Mishnah is Mishi yesh lo bor b'chatzero b'purim chayav levatel b'gimel mechitzot be'elach. So anybody who has a well or a cistern in their courtyard, you have to, in the same way that you are doing bitul chametz, right? That you no longer own it. You have to do the same thing with the bor mayim, and put up, as it were, 3 barriers between you and it, right? And then the Gemara, this is interesting. Tanan, okay, we've learned in a Baraita. Amat hamayim haoveret ba'ir asur leilech al sfata b'purim. If there is a water channel that runs through a town, you are not allowed on Purim to walk by it, lest you drink it, right? And then this is questioned because they say, well, I mean, the real issue here is drinking. It's not seeing, or is it, or does seeing lead to drinking? And if the water is muddy or turbid, then it's not an issue because you're not going to drink it anyways, right? So I mean, and then they go into the precisely the same kind of detail and clarification and so on and so forth that happens in a regular Talmudic tractate. Here's a wonderful one. All right. Hakol chayevim b'shtiya. Everybody is obligated to drink. Achad anashim ve'achad nashim ve'avadim u'shfachot. Okay, men, women, male and female servants. Rav Shtiya Omer, af behema chaya ba'of. It's like the end of Jonah, right? And even the cattle have to drink, right? The cattle have to get drunk. Yeah. Once again, hakol chayavim b'shtiya menahane milei. How do we know this from Scripture? Amar Rabbi Dana, okay. Amar Kra, v'hayamim ha'ele nizkarim ben esim. Again, from Esther, these days were publicized and memorialized, right? Ve'ein zechira ela beyayin. Okay, that's how you, again, how do we know that? Shneimar zachoret yom hashabbat lekadsho. Ma zechira ha'amur b'shabbat beyayin. Af zechira ha'amur b'forim beyayin. Now, in fact, that zechira on Shabbat is with yayin. That
also from Tractate Pesachim.
That's exactly that's traditional. That's traditional. It also appears in a number of places. And so here they're taking the tradition and they're just reaching a little bit more with it.
Well, also, I mean, one thing I want to point out is that Breita in the regular tractate Pesachim, when it says Zochoret Yom Hashbat, Zachrehu al Hayayin,
right?
That they talk about that. The funny thing is, it seems to be coming out of nowhere, like just literally out of thin blue air. And I mean, there Tosfos calls it a smach be'alma, but here they're kind of playing with it. We're like, where does it even come from? And
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, again, the reason is because, I mean, interestingly enough, wine is the Greco-Roman context.
Yeah.
And it's not in scripture, so consequently they have to find another wonderful one. Okay, kol chayavei tefilot shehigia zman taharatan befurim tovlin beyayin. Okay, the sota, the nazir, shotin, ein chosheshin. Okay, so anybody who is requiring of immersion in the context of purification. And the time for their immersion arrives on Purim, so they immerse themselves in wine, not in water, a mikveh of wine, as it were, and also Nazir and Sota. Sota, of course, has to drink the bitter waters. Nazir, of course, is not supposed to drink wine at all. That's the whole point. But we make an exception on Purim. Okay, so everybody drinks wine on Purim.
Yeah. By the way, on the same page, I got to point out, since it's here, one of the highlights for me was this piece, which we kind of mentioned earlier. This piece where it says Noach nitzol mimabol netmar vayishta min hayayin. So Noach was saved from the flood. It says he drank from the wine and he got drunk, and then also Lot was saved from everything being destroyed.
Exactly.
It talks about, so those are both from Genesis 9 and Genesis 19, where they're both getting drunk. But here it's praising their actions, that the drunkenness helped save their very lives.
That's exactly right. And those motifs, interestingly enough, do go back to that Agadic Massekhet Purim from the 17th century.
Yeah. By the way, also around here, it also talks about over here where it says Amar Rabbi Kada Oto Yom Sheshata Noach Yaim Purim Haya.
Right.
So the day that he drank, and then also the day that Lot drank was also happened also in Purim. So they're saying, oh, why were they getting drunk? It was Purim.
It was Purim, right? Exactly. I mean, again, in the Torah story, right? Where do you have examples of people getting drunk? Well, you've got Noah, you've got Lot, and as you said, v'nahafochu on Purim. That's the point. Everything is turned on its head.
Right.
So these become your good guys.
Right. There is another occasion actually that people get drunk, but it seems to be not something that people are aware of. But Joseph's brothers, when they come to Egypt, they all get drunk. And it doesn't merit a lot of attention. But there's not a lot of drunken stories within the Chumash.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
One other thing I want to point out here, which is just hilarious, was right here that if you destroy someone's wine, and they said, oh, well, if it's on Purim, you have to do double. And then so they basically say, well, also because of bitul mitzvah, you lose out on the mitzvah by destroying someone's wine.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
That was very amusing.
Here are just a couple more instances in which they're parodying actual Mishnayot. So at the beginning of chapter 3, you have a parody of now we're in chapter 10 of Pesachim. Erev Purim, samuch lemincha, asor lishtot yayin va'asis, v'chol hamashkin ha-meshakrin, kedei sheyishteh befurim yayin l'teavon. That is a direct corruption, if you will, of the beginning of the 10th chapter. You're not supposed to eat samuch lemincha on Erev Purim, so that you will enter on Erev Pesach, so that you will enter Pesach with an appetite for, tam hamatzah, right? And here the idea is that, but ironically, if you look at the Gemara there, okay, Tano Rabbanan, Hasidim Harishonim, Hayu Mefarshin Atzman Shivat Hayamim Kodem Purim, Aval Hasidim Achronim Shotim Umeshachrin Kol Hayamim. Amru Shikrot Kol Shata V'Shata Zamnahu. You know, at any time of day, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, it's funny because they said, you know what, for a whole week beforehand, we're going to be dry. We're not going to drink. And then whatever, they just get. But it's also funny they're still Hasidim Ha'achronim. That they're more. I mean, I don't know if this is also playing to contemporary times at their time, where you also talk about, the Hasidim of our days, they're just always getting drunk.
Exactly. And similarly, so the next Mishnah is a parody of the beginning of Brachot. Me'ematai matchilim lishtot b'furim beherev shemesh debeirav shakran v'rav yena amru mitzeta kochavim. Right, so it's like the beginning of when do you recite the Shema? And similarly, you also have a parody of the section of chapter 1 of Megillah, where Ein Bein X Lawai Ela Z, right, which begins, the difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov. So here you have Ein Bein Yom Tov Lepurim Ela Shikrut Bilvad, right? And then they say, well, actually, that's not the only difference. But and then they also say, Vitula, really, is that it? V'ha'ika chipus shikrut, right? That you also have to go around looking for it. It's not just enough to do it, right? You have to pursue it. And they say, well, no, that's not halakha, that's minhag, okay? But then, okay, you can tell that these guys are post Shulchan Aruch because they've read Israelis, and they say, but minhag avotenu Torah, right? Minhag for this is very Ashkenazi. Minhag for us is Torah, is halakha.
So, by the way, on the same page, I want to go back up.
Yeah.
So this was one thing that was amusing was right here at the very top. Tanu Rabbanan, kol hamazalzel b'shtiyat yain b'purim. So anybody who denigrates a drinking of wine on Purim, chamisha minei yisurim bam alav. That there are 5 different types of bad things that happen to a person, and then Shnei Amar that it gives a pasuk, but a scriptural verse. But that was really funny. Like you can't just be I think. What's the mizalzel at hamoadot, right? You're in regular rabbinic literature. You're not allowed to denigrate these types of practices, but like it's this valued practice. You cannot denigrate Purim wine drinking. Precisely. The hilarious thing that just gets totally it becomes like a runaway is this right before the Mishnah you just read off that they talk about. There's some line they say something about. The Kruvia de Gan Hagruya, and then they basically say, "Oh, what is this thing?" The Gruvia Devania Grunim Amar Klaus Figing. They say, "My Figing. What's Figing?" Amar Rav Batsel. Oh, it's clondine. My clondine. Oh, Amar. Oh, it's this. My Atlinin. Right. It's just because normally you come across 1 or 2 things, and it just becomes
that's exactly an
absurd chain of just like, oh, what's this old term? Oh, we don't know. Oh, it's this. And
exactly. So this is again taking a what is a common rhetorical occurrence in the Bavli and multiplying it, right?
Right.
And what I don't know, because I haven't checked this out, but it's worth checking out, is whether these are obviously quote unquote la'azim, that is to say, these are words from another language, and whether in fact these are German or Polish words.
Yeah, it's like this last one, French or
French. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You see that a lot.
I wanted to break in really briefly. I'm Rabbi Drew, your host and founder of JewishDrinking.com. Turns out, as of this fall, the IRS has recognized Jewish Drinking as a 501c3 organization. You are always welcome to make donations. If you have any questions how to do so, you can check out the website or even simply email me at drew@jewishdrinking.com. Thank you. Now back into the show. But water is a really funny thing as it appears in this parody Masechta.
Absolutely. This parody is all about up with wine and down with water. Okay. And it even begins that way. I mean, water is the villain, right? For example, in parodying the beginning of Massekhet Purim, we begin here, or la'arba asar bodkin et hamayim min habatim, as opposed to bodkim et chametz, right? So on the eve of the 14th, of course, of Adar, and not of Nisan, we search for water, and we rid ourselves of water, right? Both in terms of habatim and hatzerot. There you have it, both out of our houses and out of our courtyards. Okay. Kol makom she'ein machnisin bo mayim ein tzarich b'dika, as is the case on Pesach, where you don't carry chametz, you don't have to look for it. And similarly for Purim, where there's no water, you don't have to look for it, right?
I mean, it's already funny. It would have just
exactly right.
It would have been one thing to say how bad water is, how we're supposed to, it's off limits, it's forbidden, no one should do any of that water drinking. But this direct connection with Passover.
That's the point.
We all know how off limits chametz is. It's like
That's right.
worst thing for Passover. Here, it's lifting the language. It doubles down on the rhetorical effect.
Exactly. It's the worst thing for Purim. Yeah. And the Gemara asks, of course, menahane milei, that is to say, from where in Scripture do we know this? From the Torah? Because Scripture says in Deuteronomy, Uviarta hara mikirbecha, okay, and you shall expunge the evil from your midst. Ve'ein ra ela mayim, and evil only refers to water. And how do we know that? Shenemar v'hamayim hara'im, okay, the bad waters, right? The waters that need to be made sweet. So this is typical of the kind of, this is yeshiva bacher humor. That is to say, it's a wonderful, wonderful parody of Talmudic logic, of Talmudic hermeneutics, and of Talmudic discourse, and proof texting, and other and baraitot and other traditions and.
Right. It's also parodying. I mean, it's again the rhetorical piece of it, of doubling down on, you can really take almost any pasuk and do whatever you want to it, and they are doing literally that to it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And
water is evil.
Exactly. What makes this so brilliant is that, any good satirist or parodist has to be a master of what he or she is parodying, right? You have to. In other words, this is a loving parody. That's the point. That is to say, we're sending up the Talmud because we love the Talmud, right? That's the point. That's the point. Similarly, in the next matnitin, Mi sheyesh lo bor b'chatzero b'furim. This is again out of Bava Batra. Mi sheyesh lo bor b'chatzero b'furim chayav levatel b'shlosha mechitzot ve'elach. That's right. So whoever has, this is a cistern, obviously a water cistern, right? In his courtyard, he has to nullify it. It's in the same way that you nullify chametz. So the Gemara says. Tanan, we have a baraita. Okay, amat hamayim haoveret be'ir asur leilech al sifata b'furim. Right. Yeah. So you can't even walk by a stream of water on Purim, right? That's the whole point.
And I love this at the bottom, this sort of faux braita, which is Purim shiyardu geshamim. If it happens to be raining on Purim, yiskor adam b'toch beito v'ochel v'shotav v'samech libo, that someone should lock themselves in their house and eat and drink and just be happy. If they went outside, over below transgressed.
Exactly, that's right. You're transgressed. That's so. So if the weather outside is pouring, just stay inside and drink your wine. Don't get involved with the water, right?
Yeah, it's a real physical bodily avoidance of water.
Absolutely.
It takes it to comical I mean, it's one thing to open everything with this avoidance of water. You shouldn't drink water, but even this comical avoidance of water, just stay at home and just drink and eat.
Absolutely.
Hey there, I hope you're enjoying the show. I want to break in. If you are enjoying this content, if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy other content I publish here with whether the Jewish Drinking Show or jewishdrinking.com, it's not just a website. It's not just the internet. I also exist in real life. I've spoken here in Southwest Ohio, as well as just the other month out of town in a couple different places, both Midwest, East Coast. I'm happy to actually bring Jewish drinking content to you, whether JCC, synagogue, Jewish organization. You don't even have to be a Jewish organization. You want to pay me? You want to have me bring insightful and lively content your way? Happy to do so. You can feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com, and we can see how we can bring l'chaims to life. All right, now back into the show.
It's a wonderful piece of Talmudica.
Yeah.
And I mean, last year on Purim, you talked with Adam Rosenthal about the 14th century Massekhet Purim by Clonimus ben Clonimus. This one actually is more Talmudic. In the sense, the other one is a little bit more, shall we say, Mishnaic or Tanaitic in its style, and also in the nature of its material. This really does get into Talmudic shaklavataria. And I mean, they just really go at it, and they just have a good time.
Yeah.
And all the rabbis, kishmo kenhu, they're all about getting drunk.
Yep. Literally in their names in this one segment.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I would like to point out about this text, if there are people who where can we find this text, right? It actually is available online. It's been uploaded if you Google Purim. And actually, if you call Bo Lepurim, this is a 19th century anthology. Printed in Lviv around 1854 and reprinted in Brooklyn around 1950 or so. And it contains the full text of Massekhet Purim, this one, and it also contains Sheilot Tshuvot Shikurim, Ma'araviyot Lepurim, Ata Hareta Ladat, Hakafot, Kiddush, Yotzrot, Hoshanot, Zemirot, Tfilat Ne'ilah, L'chag HaPurim, Shir HaMa'alot, V'yoledet BaPurim, and Akdamot LePurim, and a Haggadah Leil Shikurim, and Slichot LePurim. So it is a grand anthology of Purim Torah and Purim liturgy. And there are just some wonderful, wonderful pieces here, and each of these four items actually comes from a different time and a different author, which is kind of interesting. Most of them are 19th century, with the exception of Massekhet Purim, which is 18th century.
Oh, cool!
But they all had a great time.
They really showed that you got to really yuck it up
to bring this to a rousing conclusion. Okay. Here is your Kiddush LePurim. This was written by Abraham Mendel Moore in the early decades or middle decades of the 19th century. Yom HaPurim Vayechulu Hamayim Min Haaretz V'chol Tzva'am. There's your, all the water disappears, right? That's the point. Vayechal Lot Bayom HaPurim Kado Asher Shata, our good friend Lot, who's getting drunk, right? Vayishteh Bayom HaPurim Mikol Kadav Asher Shata, Vayevarech et Yom HaPurim Vayikadesh Oto Kivo Shata Mikol Mashkav Asher Bachar Lishtot. And then Savri Sororim Umorim Ushikurim Baruch Ata Mocher Peri Hagafen. Baruch Ata Asher machar lanu b'kol yayin, v'hishkinu b'kol devash, v'hishkiranu b'kosotav, v'titen lanu be'ahava, mashkim l'simcha, yayin u'devash l'sason, et yom chag hapurim hazeh zman shikrutenu, Ba'arba'asar lechodesh asur l'shtiyat mayim. Okay, instead of zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim, right?
Yeah.
Ki lanu macharta ve'otanu hirveta mipri kramim umashke kadecha b'simcha v'sason hishkartanu. Baruch atah mocher mashkim u'ma'adanim. And then, of course, we conclude Baruch atah shehishkanu v'hishkiranu v'higmiyanu lazman hazeh. Right? Just keep drinking.
That's hilarious. Hishkartanu.
Yeah, I mean, these guys are so smart. I mean,
yeah.
Not surprisingly, right? But I mean, they know their stuff inside out, and they're just having fun with it. All kinds of puns, all kinds of double entendres, all kinds of homonyms, and so on and so forth. And it's just a lot of fun. And I share this with all of my classes every year on Purim.
It's good. It's good, good to see this Purim Torah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's regular Torah for regular days of the year, and then there's Purim Torah for Purim. Yeah. And of course, the Balei Halakha said you mustn't study this any other time of the year. It's barely okay on Purim, but
right.
Don't confuse this with the real thing.
Yeah. And Massekhet Purim is well done. It is. Yes,
it's very well
confusingly well done. Yeah,
that's exactly the point, and that's what makes it so delightful.
Professor Sarason, this has been delightful, insightful, fascinating, humorous. Before we go, is there anything you would like to promote?
Yes, there is.
Right.
Yes, there is. I and some of my colleagues, who are students of rabbinic literature in Jerusalem, in Europe, and in North America, have finally succeeded in seeing to print a new English translation of the Mishnah, printed by Oxford University Press, called the Oxford Annotated Mishnah. It's in 3 massive volumes, so it's intended to replace Danby, but it will never replace Danby on your lap. But it is really, I would say, the last word in Mishnah scholarship for those, both for those who are Mishnah scholars and those who are not. And it's also available online. And I'm told that next year the press will print it in paperback and lower the price. It sells for $645. So that's a tall glass of wine, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of wine.
That's a lot of wine.
It's a lot of wine. It's absolutely
exactly
right. Wow.
Exactly right.
All right. That's really wonderful to hear. I need to check that out. I need to look. I don't think I'm going to buy it, but I definitely need to check it out.
It's a really good piece of work.
Wonderful. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sarason, and L'chaim.
L'chaim.